Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Beneath the Transaction podcast. And on our show, we are talking about just that. How do we move beneath the transaction in our life and in our leadership? And I've been on this quest to find people that I feel have something to say in that arena. And it could be anybody. I mean, we're talking to, everyday parents. We're talking to leaders of organizations. We're talking to philanthropic executives. We're talking to community members. And it's because there's no sort of parameters to the work that we're trying to explore. And to create transformational change is no easy task. Now, I've had the privilege of being able to see it in the research that I've done and the work that I've done, but I'm really curious to learn from others. And today we have someone who I think has some really, really unique and amazing things to say about this from a philanthropic lens. Vanessa Plant, who's currently the executive director at the Alku Foundation. And I'll let her introduce herself a little more in a second. Our goal today is to talk about how do we move beneath the transaction in philanthropy. And we're going to talk about what philanthropy is for those who are not familiar with it, some of the inner workings of it. And I've been very intimately involved in philanthropy for many years. And I've seen something that has such pure and good intent turn transactional, not on purpose. And part of that doesn't sit well with me. I feel like we can do better, and that the intent of philanthropy is to create transformational change if you kind of cut away a lot of the layers. And so how do we figure out ways to do that work beneath the transaction and not just be an exchange of things, but rather more than that. So that's the goal today. Vanessa, I'm going to give you some time to introduce yourself, tell a little bit about your story, tell us about yourself and a little bit about your journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris, and thanks for having me. I'm based in Boston, came here. I grew up overseas and moved here, started my career in fundraising. So I was doing fundraising for about 20 years for a variety of different nonprofits, specifically youth development organizations and a couple others. And about 4 years ago, one of the families that I got to know through a nonprofit I worked at about 12 years ago reached out saying that they were interested in starting a family foundation and would like me to help them do so. It was an amazing opportunity for me personally and professionally to work with this family that I had a relationship with. And when I came aboard, one of the things, I started looking at processes and applications and how are we going to do this and giving cycles. And I just had this moment where I had all these documents and was making all these notes and specifically looking at deadlines. Like, should we have 2 grant cycles? How many a year? How many can I manage? And I was like, I don't want to do any of this. Like all the things that as a fundraiser I did for 20 years that I would just be banging my head on the wall, thinking was just such a burden on not small nonprofit. I was like, let's not do this, and let's do something different. So I started researching trust-based philanthropy, and it just seemed like the perfect fit for us. Our board was so excited to kind of do things differently, and also didn't see the need for all those kind of applications and reporting structures that so many foundations have.
A lot of
So yeah,
layers.
we've been around, a lot of layers and a lot of time. So yeah, we launched about 4 years ago and still going strong and growing.
So I want to kind of put a pin in this, in how you're doing things differently, because I think in that lies some of, the answer to this question of how do we move beneath the transaction in philanthropy. So, I want to put a pin in that, but first give a little historical context, just, for people that are not familiar with philanthropy. I've been involved in philanthropy for a long time, working for a private philanthropist. And there's a lot of different types of foundations out there. You mentioned family foundation. There's public, there's community foundations. There's foundations connected to, large corporations. And there's lots of advantages to foundations. There's lots of tax benefits. But at the core, the word philanthropy is love for mankind, right? It's love for our neighbor, for other people, and it's the doing good for the sake of doing good. Now, again, there's a lot of benefits to it that sometimes I feel can take precedence. depending on the world or the circles that we're in. And on the other side of it, when you were on the other side of it, working for nonprofits, it is the lifeblood. Fundraising is the lifeblood of how nonprofits operate. And there's lots of different types of nonprofits and lots of different styles of fundraising. And it sounds like you were kind of, in the bootstrap. We got to fundraise smaller nonprofits, not these huge national nonprofits that don't always have an issue receiving funds, but community-based nonprofits, they sometimes it's swim or drown. And I was on most of, actually all of my career in philanthropy, I was on the giving side of it. Now, I wasn't writing the checks, I didn't make those decisions, but I worked for the individual who gave significantly to his community and to different efforts. So I saw firsthand how far removed sometimes we can be from each other, right? Grantee, donor. And then another layer would be those who are wanting the funds, the nonprofit, the communities or people or the efforts that they're trying to engage in, those that they're serving is even farther removed. So it can get really transactional. And
Mhm.
one thing I loved about the individual I worked for was, he would just do what he wanted, and he'd write, if he wanted to give, he'd write a check and he'd go give it. And if he wanted,
Mhm.
and he had that advantage because he's what we call first generation. Once he's gone and his estate and what have you is all put into the foundation, then it gets a little more tricky. There's a little more sort of bureaucracy you have to go through. So I'm just painting the picture, and I'm not fully accurate in all of the technical pieces. So I'm not claiming to be, but I've been around it enough to get how it works. And my experience again was it can be very transactional if you're not intentional in it not being that way. So when did you start to kind of feel those barriers and the frustration that it caused? Maybe you weren't calling it transaction, but the transactional nature of it. And then we'll zoom forward to what you had mentioned when you ended last time of now you're in this position and you had this goal of we're going to remove a lot of these layers and focus on trust-based philanthropy, which is a style of philanthropy, and the world of research around ways of doing philanthropy is growing. There's not a lot of literature around it and research, but I think it's growing, and I think it should, because we're talking about billions and billions of dollars given away philanthropically a year. We ought to really be strategic and purposeful and in best ways of doing that, depending on context and environment, community, and so on.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think every funder should work in fundraising at one point because it really gives you perspective
Mm.
on what it's like to be a fundraiser. It's hard, working for a nonprofit, especially a small grassroots nonprofit whose budget is 2 million or 3 million, or even, we support organizations whose budgets are 400,000. And there's often one person doing many jobs. They often don't have a development department, and then you have the program person or the executive director doing the fundraising. But it's can be very transactional because you often don't have the capacity to kind of let things more organically unfold, or have the time to spend on cultivating relationships, which is part of the job descriptions. From my experience as a fundraiser, there was a lot of like, okay, these are my touch points. You can't make too many asks in the year. We got to schedule a meeting, especially with foundation funders. We would invite them in, or they would want to come do a site visit after we'd given them the report. And it never seemed totally aligned. Like, I often was reporting on high school graduation rates because that's
Yes.
what the funder wanted to know, where I was applying for like an elementary school program, and we didn't have those numbers. So I
Yeah.
think, it's filling out the application, submitting it, meeting with them. And I think that it's kind of, okay, I'm checking these boxes, and it's different with major donors because you are very much building a relationship there. But I think with foundations, corporate foundations, family, it can feel very transactional. And I think that having been on that side, and just, I remember, having funders come in, and I would pull out my one ill-fitting suit that I would wear 8 times a year with like uncomfortable shoes, and spend, a week preparing reports and pulling in the finance person and the program person and the ED and trying to, anticipate all the things that we would be asked, and are we showing them the right things? Are we worthy enough of receiving another grant?
Yeah.
And it's, just a pretty unpleasant experience where now being on the other side, I don't wanna do that to people. Like, I wanna show up in my jeans and sneakers, and I want them to do the same, and I wanna talk about, the biggest snowstorm we've had this season, and, "Oh my gosh, schools are closed again," and just, like, build that human connection. So I think it's just really for me, it's very important to focus on that versus, the steps and the transactional pieces of things.
Yeah, we can certainly get lost in all of that. And what I love about trust-based philanthropy is it helps break through some of those layers, and process, I guess. So talk to us about, I guess, how you see trust-based philanthropy and how you've, since you've taken on this role as executive director of a foundation, how you've integrated that into your giving and your partnerships and the work that you
Mhm.
guys do.
Yeah, sure. So we off the bat, we decided we're not gonna do applications or reporting. I don't think there's anything that I can't cover in a conversation that I would need to have on paper. It now does rely on me taking pretty good notes and
Yeah.
updating my database, which can be a challenge. But well, why put the burden on the nonprofit instead of putting it on myself? So I pull 90s, I look at financials, I meet with folks, I ask them all the questions that, I feel like are relevant in making this decision. We try to, meet in person as often as we can so that we can build that human connection. And we really listen to what our grant partners are telling us. So we have about 60 grant partners, and we surveyed them last summer,
Mm.
asking them, what's working, what they'd like to see more of, what are other funders doing that they find very valuable. And from there came out maybe 6 or 7 things that were like, okay, like they want multi-year grants. Of course they want multi-year grants. Like,
Yeah.
let's start doing multi-year grants. So we're piloting that. All of our grant making is unrestricted. We, in addition to our regular annual unrestricted grants, there is an opportunity for our grant partners to apply for larger funds through a catalyst fund that we have in the summer. But we try to make it very easy. We're very transparent. When I meet with someone, I'll let them know you fall within our areas of giving, and like this is a great match. Let me work on some things. Let me go back to my desk and do some reviewing and let you know if I have any questions. Otherwise, I can't see why we wouldn't move forward with a partnership. So we're nimble and we're quick. So we're able to just meet with someone and think, is this an organization and a leader? Like, we look very much the folks leading the organization that we want to invest in. And we're able to make that decision pretty quickly. So there aren't a bunch of steps. We don't need 3 months to make those decisions. And then once the grants are cut, it's the relationship is very important to us. So we try to get out and meet them in the community. If we can go volunteer, if we can come see their site, but also understanding those things are not always possible. So sometimes it's just connecting over Zoom, making sure we're on their newsletter and just keeping in touch.
If people are listening to this and they're in the world of philanthropy, I think they'll resonate with it. But I think there's so much to learn from our conversation for anybody. And here's what I'm thinking is, you know, we're always positioning ourselves with others in our life, whether it's our personal relationship or people we work with, professionally, organizationally to organization. We're always sort of positioning ourselves. Who am I and where do I stand in relation to this person or this group? And when we do that, there's lots of fears that arise. And in the world of philanthropy, I've noticed there's really a lot of power dynamics. Obviously, you kind of mentioned this. You get your suit on, you wear the
Mhm.
nice shoes because there's a huge power dynamic of this one person or this small group of people can have a significant impact on our financial future versus, a business. They have typically a lot of different customers and there's a variety, and they're focused on providing value to a larger audience. Sometimes in philanthropy, I notice it's much more, I got to ensure that this one person sees the value of what we're doing, and I got to meet their need individually and specifically because they're potentially a huge donor there. And then over here, the same thing, and they don't always align, and it can get really tough because we're always positioning ourselves. How are we in relation to this other person? And there's lots of fear that come into that when we do that. And so I want to talk about more where some of those fears come from. And I mentioned one, there's the power dynamic that's clear. But what have you seen in the work that you've done on both sides now of some of the fears that make it easier to just have a lot of layers and process? What are the fears of getting rid of those things and just meeting human to human? Instead, we layer it with all these things in between, reporting, like you had mentioned, actually filling out grant applications. There's obvious technical reasons for these too, but I want to talk about why do we put all these layers in? Why do we make it something where we remove ourselves sometimes from one another? Because we do the same thing even in our relationships. Sometimes we put lots of things in between us and others to streamline or simplify, and we miss opportunities to build relationships. So talk about what when I ask that question, what are some of these fears? What comes to mind of why we put these layers in between us?
I mean, I don't know the answer, but I have to say it sure makes it harder when you have a personal relationship with someone. Like if I'm connecting with someone and I'm like, there's so many leaders that I meet with and I'm so inspired and I'm like, oh, and like they don't quite fit, like they don't quite
Mm.
align with what we're trying to do, or they're a little bit out of our area. And I have to say, like, once you connect with someone, it is so much harder to say no. And often I'll be like, well, let me see if I can find something. Oh, this is a bucket of, I could, but and so maybe that's a fear. I know that, funders receive so many inquiries and so many people reach out, like the amount of, doors you have to get through to, especially, we're based in Boston and there's a lot of big funders here. And you can't just, give someone a call and be like, hey, can I talk to the ED? I want to run something
Yeah.
by them. It'd be great if everyone was more accessible like that. So I can see there being these like layers and these different kind of, okay, this is the first step and then the second step, and then we'll contact you to keep folks at a little bit of a distance to help funders manage their workload. I've not been in that position. I work for, we're a small family foundation, and I think every inquiry that's come through our website, I'll respond to. It might take me a couple of weeks. But
Yeah.
even if they're not a fit, I think just, making that connection and letting them know, like, I see you, I got your email, not quite a fit, but let's stay in touch. Sign me up for your newsletter. Or there's been some relationships that I've been able to make connections to if we're not able to help them. So I think it is, for me, still so important to make that connection and start building that relationship. But I can see why it would be difficult for especially larger funders.
Yeah. You brought up a couple of great points because I think that's a really real fear of, we'll just say rejection, whether it's on either
Mhm.
side. And the closer you get to somebody, sometimes the harder that can be. But also sometimes it makes the conversation more doable and preserves a relationship if we've put in that time into the relationship. And then there's obviously just the reason for workload. We can't do that with everyone. It would be impossible. And I remember encountering all of these things in the time I was working within philanthropy. And again, I wasn't the one making decisions to give money, but my task was, hey, how do we create transformational change in our community? And that was a big ask and it was hard to figure out, but it caused us to think about, we got to figure out a way to do things differently, because we'll say traditional philanthropy is, here's the cause, write the check, here you go, we're done, right? Like that oversimplification, but that's kind of how it's been. And there's a lot of ease with that and a lot of benefits to both sides. They get money, we get the benefit of giving that money, and on we go. But the heart of philanthropy is love of neighbor, love of man. Like it's
Mhm.
so much more than that. And we dug so deep to try to figure out a way, is there a better way of doing philanthropy in our community outside of giving to different causes that we believed in? If we really care about our community and these focus areas that become sort of the legacy areas of the philanthropist or the foundation, how do we have an impact in those areas? And we got to this place, and I want to kind of run this by you to get your thoughts, where a big part of our common language internally was, let's help people find their own answers. And that came from a lot of years of frustration, because I don't know if every donor, every foundation deals with this frustration. My assumption is that in some degree they must. Is you give money to an organization, and whatever, it could be any amount of money. It could be a little bit, it could be a lot. The stakes are higher when it's more. But what if I give it to this organization and they're just not functioning well as an organization? They don't have a succession plan. They don't have, sound process. Maybe they don't have a deep bench, as we'll say, from a leadership standpoint. But I care about what they're trying to do, so I'm going to give them this money. But there's the fear of like, well, what if they don't? What if they squander it? What if they don't use it to its fullest ability? So that's a fear, and I saw that too in the philanthropists that I worked for. That was always a concern, was the capacity within that nonprofit or that effort. And so that was one of the reasons why we developed this idea of we got to help people find their own answer. So more than just giving them money would be, well, let's work with them and let's help them have that capacity to get the most out of it. And that was one of the kind of the motivations for hiring me. Was they deployed me all over the community to work with different nonprofits and different efforts to help at a kind of a cultural and leadership level. I'm no expert in the work that they were doing, but to help at another level to where it was multiple angles addressing things that they cared about. We're going to give you the money, but we're also going to help you develop a culture and a process or a development system that's going to ensure that you're healthy as an organization. And I know there's even grants for that, but that was our approach, grassroots level in the community, of doing that. And that turned in eventually to this formal creation of Groundwork, this leadership institute, where we intentionally brought leaders in from all over the community and spent a year with them, developed the capacity within them. We felt like we have the most control working with one-on-one leaders for them to go back into their organizations and really create change. So that all came from this idea of help others find their own answer. So I want to get your thoughts on that. What do you think about this idea of helping people find their own answer in philanthropy?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about that. Think that, it's certainly not the role of a funder to go in and be like, I'm going to give you funds to do X, Y, and Z. So it's up to the organization to do that. And I think it's also not really up to the funder, in my opinion, to say that's a great idea or that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
Like, we can decide if it fits into our funding guidelines, but I think it's really trusting that the organization's leadership, not just leadership, the organization's staff as a whole, knows their mission best, knows their communities, knows their stakeholders, and are able to create and develop and implement programs to best serve them. So I think the funder's job is really to trust that leader, whoever it is that you're talking to, and believe in them and be able to support them and give them what they need in order to move things forward. I do think also supporting the programs and the organizations as a whole is essential. Of course, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't. But I think also to support the individuals working at a nonprofit. Having been on the other side, I've seen how challenging it can be. I know what it's like to work, to have someone or two people on your team leave and to be working 60-hour weeks and not getting compensation for it, which is just like, it's like, oh, you're working for a nonprofit. Like, you're here because you believe in the work, and that's just how it is. And it's can be very demoralizing not to feel like you're recognized in the way that folks should be at an organization. And I think with such limited resources, it's very hard for a nonprofit to do that. We've started 2 years ago, we started doing end of year small gifts to our nonprofit partners.
I remember you
We're
telling me
talking
about.
in like $250, like small gifts. And they cannot be put towards operational costs or program costs. It has to be used for the staff. So you can literally do anything you want with it, like a lunch or t-shirts or whatever it is. And we did that the last 2 years. The number of responses and the emails that I get back from those gifts is just like, I put them on a spreadsheet, and every now and then I look at it and I'm just like, this is why we do this. Because these folks are like, I feel seen, I feel recognized. We were able to do a team lunch. We were able to buy everyone branded hoodies that we could never do before. Or one organization split up the funds and everyone kind of reported back on these like fun things that they did in their personal lives. Like someone took a cooking class, someone went to a museum with their daughters, someone did these things. And I think it's very much about taking care of the people. Like
Mm.
these are the people that we trust are doing the work. We need to take care of them. Like organizations, when they have challenges in fundraising, the things that are cut are one organization cut their 401k match, another one cut professional development. Another one couldn't, do a tuition reimbursement for someone going back and getting his degree. Like there's so many, like these are the things that are cut because they won't cut programs. That's where their heart is. And I think it's really up to us to like recognize the work that these folks are doing and make them feel seen. I don't know if we can do that, but tell them that we see them. We see how
Yeah.
hard they're working. I think that's just a very small but important piece that I think about all the time.
Yeah, I love when you shared that with me because it's where the desire of doing things differently can lead to, right? And having the relationships with your grantees to know that there's a need there, right? And so I think it's a wonderful idea. And the beauty of it is another foundation could listen to this and say, oh, we should do that. But if they think about it only as the surface transaction of we're going to give money to celebrate, they're missing the point of what's beneath it. And beneath it is the relationship. Beneath it is the purpose and the intent behind it. And, the more that I've worked with nonprofits, as a consultant, we'll say, I've kind of seen that we'll call them whatever we want. Call them pillars. In healthcare, we talked about a three-legged stool when I was working in healthcare, clinical, financial, cultural, and organizations have kind of pillars that they believe in. I think that in nonprofit worlds, and this is just my own understanding of it, is there's a sort of a four-legged chair or stool that we'll say they stand upon. And clear ones are obviously their financial stewardship, right? They have funds and they need to have a pretty solid operation to make sure they're doing the most with those funds. They have their mission that they need to live by. And then they have this fundraising piece, which is different than the stewardship because it's, stewardship is like, okay, we have it. What are we doing with it? Fundraising is we got to get it. And then and the mission has everything to do with their work and their programs. And then there's this other one that I think is neglected often. And it's because you named it earlier, because they don't have the time or the capacity to do it. And this was part of what we saw, which is why they were deploying me and others, on our team to work with groups, was culture. A nonprofit, there's an expectation that people are just going to buy into the mission and they're going to give of themselves because we're trying to do amazing things here. We're not building widgets, right? Like we're we're doing meaningful work here at this nonprofit, especially these community-based nonprofits. And so culture gets put by the wayside. And who's going to do it? If it's not the executive director or one of the leadership team, who's going to actually focus on that? Because they're busy with the financial stewardship and the operation, the staying focused on mission and all the programs and the fundraising. Culture gets put by the wayside. So when you're telling me what you guys did as a foundation, what you all did, that was helping give time to building a strong culture in those organizations. It gave them time, capacity, and intentionality because your focus went to it. You gave it wasn't even a lot. And that's another beautiful part of this was you didn't even have to give a lot to this. It wasn't thousands and thousands of dollars. It was, what'd you say, $250, $250?
Yeah,
It wasn't a lot, but that leg, you were helping grow that leg on the stool where they didn't have the capacity to do it. And I think that's so important for a lot of nonprofits and grantees out there is they don't have the time or the resources to even focus on it. And giving them that can unlock a lot of their potential. Because truth be told, from my personal opinion, I think that culture piece is the most important in helping any organization function. It's the soil that we plant anything in and it's critical to keep healthy. So that's when I hear you say that, I'm like, you all are investing in that leg of the stool, the cultural side, and
I love
helping
it.
them feel cared about and that their work matters. And that's what culture is, how people feel and their commitment to the things that they're trying to do. So I love
And I
that.
do, thank you. I think it's one of my favorite things that we do. It's just such a joy to
Yeah.
get those emails back and hear about it. And I do think it's, like you said, you can't just if someone hears this and they're like, oh, we should do that and just cut a bunch of checks, like, sure, you can do that. They're going to appreciate it. But I think, I just today or yesterday actually got an email from one of our grant partners. We gave these donations out, these gifts out, I think end of November, early December. And they just reached out today and they're like, we finally got out for a team lunch. Here's a bunch of photos. And there's like, someone I think had a baby with them. And so, and I think for them to want to share photos, like this is, like they are seen, they feel valued, hopefully. Like it's just very human, when you can see photos of someone kind of at an outing or doing something that's not just programmatic. Like we're all just people, and the more authentic that we can be, I think it bridges a lot of those kind of challenges with the power dynamic. So in time.
Yeah. Two things I'm thinking about when you're sharing this. One of them is, I think we've talked about this before, just kind of the irony of some of the deepest impact you can have, as a foundation. Sometimes they're the hardest things to measure, and they can cost the least, because outside of having that feedback and those pictures and everything from what you're doing, it's hard to measure and say, this helped this nonprofit do all these other things, right? And so now there's another conversation to be able to help people tie the importance of those moments and building a strong culture, how that impacts the work that they do. There's a strong argument there, but I don't know if we're doing that all the time. And so we don't know if, like, outside of the anecdotes, is this really, really moving that nonprofit and that organization forward? I think it does. I'm just saying that the way to measure it is hard. So that's one thing I'm thinking about. The other thing is I had mentioned to you in our efforts, I'm not going to disclose too many numbers for the privacy of the individual I worked for, but the amount that they would give checks wise, grants wise, was pretty significant. It was a large amount of money, and a very big donor in our community, probably the largest. Then we ran this institute, which was a fraction of that, like so small on a spreadsheet, it wouldn't even compare to some of the other efforts. But it had one of the deepest and most sustainable impacts, because we were focused on developing people and building culture. And completely different context, but that's what I think about when you share that story, is because the focus was in an area that outlasts, a check, and focuses on relationships, and that's where culture kind of resides.
Well, I think also employees stay at an organization not just because of the paycheck or they believe in the mission, but it's because of the culture and the people. And so that investment, I think you can't put a number on it or a price on it. I think that a happy employee is going to stay there. And we often, when I meet with folks, I ask them, how long has most of your employees been there? What's the turnover like? Like, what are you hearing from your employees? And it's telling, we don't reject folks for that. But I think if, someone's like, newest employee has been here for 4 years versus like, oh, we just lost our entire team and we've had this big turnover. And often there's big reasons for that with leadership changes and different things. But I think that folks do stay because of the culture of an organization. Yeah. So that investment is just so important.
100%. It doesn't matter the industry or the sector. The culture is what people will remember, and in most cases why they stay. There's a lot of research that says that people will actually turn down higher compensating roles, higher level titles, to stay at a place where culture is strong, and that's what's most important to them. So that also tells us where our focus should be in our organizations as leaders. Doesn't matter if we're for-profit, nonprofit, government, which all have different funding styles, goals, ways of paying the bills. I've seen that business leaders tend to invest more in culture because for a few different reasons. And this is just my assumption, and some people maybe think I'm way off, but in the nonprofit world, we've talked about the scarcity that there is. And there's the stewardship element. So it's, if you're giving me money because you believe in one of our programs, I want to make sure that program is the absolute best. And so what I'm not thinking about is my culture and my team the absolute best.
Okay.
I'm focused so much on making sure that our donor audience feels like we're producing the results that they want to see. And that can easily steal the show. And obviously in government areas, they struggle a lot with culture too, because they're always going to have their, typically, unless there's budget cuts, they're going to have funding. They're not selling something that requires we have to sell this service or this product in order to get paid. It's a very different environment where when I worked with businesses, they don't have one single stakeholder in a donor that they have to please. It's a huge customer audience, whatever it is that they're trying to do. And if they fail at it, it's kind of it's on them, right? They're running their business. And so they have to intentionally invest in culture. And I've seen people do that well and not so well. And there's no easy way to do it because culture it's not really seen. It's
Yeah.
unseen a lot of the times, and it's a lot of hard work because it's hard to measure. You can do employee feedback and surveys and stuff, but that doesn't always give you the most accurate level of how a culture is. And so I think that going back to our conversation, there is potential for foundations to help invest in the culture of organizations because it's only going to produce better outcomes in programs and initiatives that they care about. And I see it as the soil. In fact, in our institute, we would talk about culture as the soil of an organization. And if you have toxic soil and you plant a really amazing seed, so even if a nonprofit has like the best program around, if you plant that in toxic soil, it's just a matter of time before it doesn't get the nutrients it needs and the fruit is not going to be good. And so the best seed planted in toxic soil isn't going to produce the fruit that you want. Where in reverse, sometimes you can get a not perfect seed, but if you plant it in healthy soil, it's going to get everything that it needs to grow and bear fruit. And so the question is what are we focused on in philanthropy? The soil or the fruit or the seeds? And I've seen more often than not, it's the fruit and the seeds, and the soil kind of gets forgotten. How can we change that? We're small fish in a very large pond of philanthropy.
Yes.
What can we start doing to change that? Now, you're obviously leading a small foundation. You just like to talk to foundations and philanthropists, but what can we do to shift things a little bit? Not stop doing what we're doing. We need to give grants, and we got to help nonprofits, and we got to give to causes. But what else
Yeah.
could we do to focus on soil instead of just the fruit or the seeds? Does that question make sense?
It does. It totally does. When you were talking about it, I was like, 100% we should be focused on the soil. And I think that we just need to invest in the people and not just financially, not just the end of year gifts, not just the grants, but I think, listening to them and listening to what the challenge, celebrating the good and the wins, and then listening to what the challenges are.
Yeah.
We work in our community, and I think, we want everyone to succeed. So if I can help make a connection, or if I can listen to someone, and, I've had some executive directors or director of developments, like we go out to lunch and I'll get texts afterwards and they're like, "Oh my God, did I overshare?" I'm like, "No, I often
Yeah.
wonder if I overshared, but I want this to be this authentic relationship. And if, someone wants to tell me that they're looking for another job and can I be a reference? Like, yes, like we have a relationship. Like, of course I'm, considering the organization, and I want to make sure this is a succession plan and all the things are in line. But I think for me, it's like that human connection and being authentic and being willing to, do whatever it is that's going to help them. And if that's a connection or additional dollars or, listen, whatever that is, it's really just listening to what they need and having the trust that they will be honest with you too.
That is soil work right there.
Mhm.
Developing and cultivating strong relationships, regardless of the seeds or the fruit that come from it, is cultivating healthy soil. And it only helps nourish good things thereafter. I'll put it this way, I've never seen something go wrong because someone focused on the soil more than anything
Right.
else. In other words, the relationship, the trust, that always leads to something better. But it's so easy for the fruit to steal the show, like, well, we got to get these
Right.
results. We need to see these outcomes, and they take precedence over the relationship. And this is in every industry out there, and families. We so quickly forget the relationship and, the in the islands, and I know we've talked a little bit about some of the culture where my ancestors come from, but in the islands, there's terms for this. And one that I write about in my book often, it's kind of a key thread throughout the whole thing, is this idea of kapwa. And it's a Filipino term, Kapwa. And kapwa is essentially, there's no real clear way to define it in English. There's multiple ways to actually describe it. But some of my favorite ways of defining it in English is this collective identity that we have is kapwa. And another one is I am who I'm in relation to, is what kapwa means. And that they have a word for it. It's so important in these cultures that they have a word to talk about a relationship. And I think relationship in English doesn't do it justice. Relationship could mean a number of different things, but kapwa means this, we care about this and above all else. And I think we that, to me, that's soil work. And what you're doing when you go out even to informal lunches with people and you focus on that more than anything is one of the most important and easiest things that we can do when we're
Mhm.
in the world of philanthropy. But then taking it a step further and saying, what can we strategically do to invest in soil? And like you all, we're going to give these end of year, celebration. I can't remember what you call them. Celebration grants. Is that what you call them? What do you guys call them?
I don't think we have a name for them. We were just like, we should give everyone, like, we haven't created this formal program about it. I'm just like, "Oh, yeah, I'm just gonna send all the,"
But
yeah. So we'll come up with a name.
it's
I'll
so
keep you
good though,
posted.
because it's a small. It may appear small, but you've seen it has huge ripple effects.
Right.
And to me, if I laid out on a chart, like here's fruit that we're trying to achieve, like here's the outcomes we want to see. You mentioned it earlier, graduation rates, and in a previous role, like
Mhm.
it could be that, right? A lot of foundations care about education. They probably care about third grade reading levels and stuff, and graduation rates. Let's just use that as an example. That's the fruit that we want to see, and so we want to see good programs. So we got to invest in those programs. But there's two other things missing, actually. There's the soil, right, that we've been talking about, and then there's the
Right.
weeds that are actually out there. And the weeds they're the
Mhm.
conflict and the problems that exist in our communities and organizations that get in the way and suck the nutrients away from the good seeds that we want to grow. But still, that's a problem of soil. So it's like, what if we laid that out as a foundation? Soil, seeds, weeds, fruit, and we started to strategize, how are we going to help in the organizations that we care about, our grantees in these areas. And it doesn't have to be a big financial investment, like you said. Like it could be something small, but I think being intentional about it will help it live on. You know what I mean? It will help it last longer than just a season. It will become strategic. And I think that's a small thing that I believe we can do in philanthropy. And there's probably lots out there that are doing it. So I'm not saying this is a widespread problem, but I do think that we can do better. For sure. And I feel bad saying that, because it's like, well, foundations give money away. Why are you telling them to be better? They're giving stuff away. It's like, well, we can still be
But
better.
we can be better. And I think, lately we've heard so much about foundations increasing their giving from like 5% to 6%.
Mm,
But we do more than double that. And we're, open to doing more. And I think that's the benefit of being a nimble small foundation. I've been in meetings with my board where we have a pool of funding for like a specific grant, but there were so many partners that we want to support. And one of our board members is like, wait, why do we need to stick to this specific number? And I'm just like, well, that's in the budget. And they're just like, right, but couldn't we just take another 100,000, support them all? And I'm like, yeah, we absolutely could. So I think, you know, why not? Like, I can't think of a good reason not to. Like, sure,
yeah.
it's 100,000 less than the endowment that's earning money so that we can give away more. But I think if we can meet the moment and we can do something now, having that mindset of like, let's do it, let's do more, and not shying away from that is really important.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it might not even be a dollar amount, like
Mm.
one thing that I came across in my research, the kind of the three main variables in my doctoral research was the power of cross-sector collaboration, transformational type of leadership, and foundations as catalysts. And that one was so critical because foundations have an excess that they're giving. That's the beauty of it,
Mm.
right? But they also have a high level of influence and human like we'll just call it influential capital. They can get people in a room sometimes that would never get in a room together. And they can invite conversations and communities that sometimes no one else could invite. And that was part of, so when I talked about financially they were giving to other efforts much more than our effort of running groundwork. But we were leveraging this influence capital in that area more than any other category. We were pulling people in from all sectors, people from different sides of political aisles, people that would have never connected or built relationships with each other. We were bringing them into the same space to do that. And we saw that have a huge ripple effect. And so it's like, even in your circle of influence in Massachusetts, what would it be like? And maybe you already do this. And if you do, you can just say, Chris, we already do that. So shut up. But what would it be like to bring people together? And what would it look like if they collaborated and worked with one another? And that's more sort of place-based philanthropy. I mean, even at a large scale, I was surprised. I worked with a large foundation for a time, and we had implemented this strategy where they wanted to actually bring, they wanted to sort of create a groundwork style leadership institute in their own community. And they've been around for a long time, a couple decades or more. And we said, well, one of the key strategies, we got to listen and learn from your community. So let's get people in from all over the community. You have a nice, beautiful location here, building. Let's get them in here and let's actually talk to them about the needs that they're seeing in the community around leadership development and what's missing. Let's bring them together. And so they did. And we had 2 sessions and they brought all these people together. And after they told me, they said, we've been around for a long time. We've never done that. We've never brought all those people into our location to have a conversation like that. And they were amazing conversations. So they were blown away. And to me, I was kind of shocked, like, man, there's this huge influential capital that you have that's untapped. And that's just another way to I think have an impact in communities that foundations have access to that I don't know if all are using. Sometimes there's no dollar amount to it. It might be an operational cost, maybe to convene people or host people, but that can go a really long way, and it can make connections and bring people together in a way that nothing else could have done. Anyways,
I think
Vanessa, I've talked more than I should have this entire episode. I'm so sorry.
No, I just love this topic so much. And I think there is so much power in just getting people face to face. The number of times I've met someone at like a fundraiser or an event, a community event, and somehow it's like the best kind of mental game to be like, okay, I'm going to find like where we can connect, like what we can connect over. And maybe it's like travel or food or family or backgrounds, whatever that is. And inevitably it's like, oh my God, well, do you know so-and-so? Well, I have to introduce you. And I think making those connections and kind of seeing where they roll off to is huge. And you can't do that over Zoom or over a phone call, or like it really needs to be an in-person conversation, whether it's, scheduled or, on a whim or whatever it is that you're running into people. And one of the things that we did here in the survey that we did of our grant partners last summer is that they would love more opportunities to get together with other grant partners, with other funders. So we're going to do it. I don't know what it looks like yet. Our partners are across the state, so some are hours and hours away from each other. But I think maybe we'll try maybe something virtual. I don't love that. I really think people need to be in person, or maybe we'll do a few, one in Boston, one in Western Mass, on the South Shore, on the Cape. But I think that just getting folks in the same room, like so often I'll leave a meeting and I'm like, I gotta write that down. Like there's some great idea that someone's come up with, or I'm not taking other people's ideas, but like that we've come up with together, or some prompt or something that's made me just really get my wheels turning. And I think that is just so valuable in kind of making that time to be in person. I love that.
When we got organizations together consistently year after year and leaders in those organizations, I mean, there's so many stories of little things that started to happen that felt normal, where if they happened outside of this would have been, I had to stop the group sometimes and be like, do we just see what just happened here? Because that doesn't happen in other communities. Here's a couple of examples. One time at the beginning, we would kind of share updates on things that are going on in the community before we jump into our sessions. We have multiple nonprofit leaders, government officials, business leaders, everything in the room, right? This is several months into our program. So they have deep trusting relationships at this point. And gosh, what was going on in the community? Something was going on that was causing, I can't remember what it was, but it was causing there was a lack in I think it was an event. One of the nonprofits, we're talking like, I got Boys and Girls Club, YMCA there, Croc Center. We got local nonprofits, big ones in our community, like Family Building Blocks. I mean, there's multiple people in the room, and the Boys and Girls Club, they were basically like, hey, you know, we are trying to run, I think it was an event. I'm getting logistics wrong, but they were running an event, but they were understaffed. They didn't have the money to pay for a certain thing that they needed to do. And so what typically would have been, hey, we need to get more funding for this, I'm telling you, in 10 minutes, they solved it. Well, one of the soccer club was like, well, I can send some of our coaches over to help out. YMCA is like, not a big deal. I can send some of our people to help out as well. And I'm telling you, a couple minutes, they solved a problem together that would have required some extra funding,
Right.
outside of it. Things like that started happening, and they talked about it so naturally that I had to be like, hey, do you guys all realize what just happened there? Like, that doesn't happen, 6 months ago, before we
Mhm.
did all this, before we spent time building relationships and focusing on soil. That doesn't happen. So I had to pause them to see that. Another example that I love is the YMCA was doing a big block party downtown, and, a competitor in the community, YMCA's are Croc centers, Boys and Girls Club, things like that. And while they were always cordial and nice with each other, once we started this effort, they were like best friends. So they're running this block party, and they need people to run booths. And you never guess who shows up to run booths. Croc Center does, Boys and Girls Center shows up to help run booths. And then the COO of the YMCA was like, hey, thank you guys so much for doing this. You can bring your stuff, like bring your pamphlets, bring your own stuff, your own sort of swag to like give away. And this was their literal response. No, 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 no. His name was Bubba. Bubba, we're here to help you, man. Like, this isn't about us. We're here to help you. And those
Mhm.
sort of moments, I'm telling you, that doesn't happen without intentionality
Right.
of building relationships and focusing on soil. Moments like that and experiences like that just started popping up everywhere. And you know how much they cost from a grant perspective for us? Zero. Like, it was
Mm.
$0. And the impact was notable. I'm rambling at this point, but I love what I loved most about our first conversation was your desire to be different and break out of, in my words, the transaction. You had been on the other side of philanthropy for so long. You thought there could be a better way, and you seem like someone who is set on ensuring that you're going to continue to find out a better way to do it. So my last question for you is what does it take? Your advice for people listening right now, no matter if they're in philanthropy or not, what should we do to live beneath the transaction?
I think be authentic. That's the biggest piece. I think authentic is real. It's messy. It's funny. It's like all the things. And I think when I go to work, to lunches, coffees, to site visits, to fundraisers. Like there's Vanessa you get on weekends is the same as like Vanessa
Right.
you get on a Tuesday coffee meeting. And I think it's sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's very serious. And I think that just bringing your true authentic self and being open to learning and understanding and getting to know the person in front of you, like just amazing things happen when you come with that like open heart and you're just, yeah, I want to hear about work. But before we jump in, like, tell me about you. If we're having this conversation and I'm investing in you and your work, I want to know you a little bit. Like, what makes you tick and what do you hate and what do you like and what are the challenges and what's the good and all the things. And I think finding those connections is really what keeps, the heart pumping, what keeps things moving.
That's a beautiful and simple way for people to move beneath the transaction is authenticity. And what that's not to me is, some people might say, well, it's just not my personality. I'm type this or I'm type that. And those have utility, but we can't use them as a reason to not do the right thing.
Yeah.
So if it's not our personality to be authentic and to focus more on the relationship and not the business, doesn't mean that we have that we're off the hook. And in fact,
Right.
one of the conversations I had just the other day in one of our episodes was with the VP of HR for all of Captain D's, like 500 plus locations in the southeast restaurants. And our whole conversation was around actually focusing on leading with the relationship at work. And I think that's just another way of saying what you're saying here is being authentic, to the human to human interaction that we get to share, because at the end of the day, that's what matters most. So I love
Right.
that insight. I could keep talking to you for a long time. You make it easy to talk. Usually, I'm telling you, usually I am not. I'm asking more questions and listening more, but I like your style. So I just have had a fun time
Well, it's
on
very
this
authentic.
conversation. Yeah. Yes. So appreciate your time, and I thank you for
Thank
joining the
you.
show, and maybe we'll have a round 2 or something down the road, but
Awesome.
this was really a good conversation. I think anybody could pull a lot from this, not just if they're in the world of philanthropy, but even outside of that. So I just want to thank you again for joining.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. All right. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in today. Another episode of Beneath the Transaction. Until next time, take care.